Local and live, covering Franklin and Washington counties, it's Let's Talk Tri-State with Tiny and Katy.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Tri-State, powered by Home Right Windows and Doors, the right choice winner in the 2024 Best of the Tri-State Awards.
Our first guest today, we have Don Shenk, who is the director of an organization called The Tide, which is something that I personally am not familiar with. So, first of all, Don, thank you for spending some time with us today on Let's Talk Tri-State.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to share with the people something you're not familiar with and something I've sometimes referred to as Chambersburg's best kept secret. We don't want to be Chambersburg's best kept secret.
Well, walk us through it.
Okay, the Tide started in 1946 when Chambersburg was getting their first radio station. Imagine that, back in 1946. And there was a young man by the name of Charlie Byers who was pastoring the, today it's called the Mission Hill Church. It's a Chambersburg congregation that he was working at. And there were people in the congregation who said, hey, there's a radio station coming to town. You're a good speaker. You should go on the air. And the one couple actually said, we'll pay the airtime for that first year if you will book the time. So he was on the very first day that that station aired. Was a Sunday. And we're not sure whether he was the first or second program. That's a little bit unclear. But the first day that station went on the air, he was there preaching the gospel. And that program began to grow in popularity. It spread across North America. And then about 50 years ago, Transworld Radio started up, and they set up transmitters to beam the gospel into other parts of the world. And he had a connection with some people there, and they said, hey, bring your program on. We'll send it into former English colonies where English is understood. So it started first in Southern Africa, then in India. There wasn't as much of a response in India, but they switched and started broadcasting in Hindi instead of English. And immediately there was a much greater response. And that was sort of like a transition time for the organization, when they realized people respond much better when they hear in their own language. And so it's not a foreign concept coming in. And so that started a transition. So today, we no longer have any English programming. I do a 1-minute spot, a global update from the Tide Ministry every week. But as far as long-form programs, we work with indigenous groups around the world. We help them create and utilize their own media outreach. So they're sharing the gospel with their own people in a very culturally relevant context. Now, there are some organizations that will translate, and you can take and you can translate teachings and things, but it's much more impactful when people hear one of their own sharing with them what God has done in their life. And so that's kind of the the procedure we use. And it's bigger. I sometimes tell people that the radio, we still do primarily radio, but we do more online things and also some TV broadcasting. We produce the content. We don't have the broadcasting facilities. That's kind of like the tip of the iceberg. But there's a whole lot going on underneath that in the countries with the connecting with listeners and other outreach ministries that go along with preaching the gospel to them.
How many locations are there?
Currently, we have active ministry partnerships in 12 different countries. We are expanding right now in the Balkan area, and we also have a connection, a Arabic language broadcast that covers the whole Middle East and North Africa.
What are you finding to be the areas where you're meeting the most resistance?
The greatest resistance right now is India. Basically anywhere from the Middle East across Central Asia into South Asia, there's resistance. India right now is the greatest area. Well, I guess that's where we're noticing it the most, because they've had their elections earlier this year, and again, their prime minister has made it very clear that he wants India to be a Hindi nation. And so Christians, Muslims, he wants them out. Anything that's not Hindi, he'd like out of the country.
So he wants the physical people gone. He's encouraging for them to leave the country, or he just doesn't want
He doesn't want the religion there.
coming in. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And
And
are there penalties by law over there for that, or will there be?
there are, officially, India is like the U.S., a secular republic that allows freedom of religion. But more and more states within India are enacting what they'll call, they have different words for it, but it's essentially anti-conversion legislation. So it is illegal to try to convert someone from one religion to another. So it's not necessarily illegal to be a Christian, but to try to convert someone. And for many people, if they do accept Christianity, if they want to change their religion, it's actually a legal process because your religion is part of your documentation. Like, we don't carry ID cards, but if you had your passport, or in many of these countries, they do have ID cards, and it will state their religion on there. And to get that changed is a legal process.
Interesting. Don, walk us through a little bit about your background and how you ended up with the Tide.
Oh boy, how far back do you want to go?
Well, first of all, you said you were born in Africa.
Yes.
What part of Africa?
I was born it's Zimbabwe today. It was Rhodesia when I was born.
Wow.
And I went through my schooling there. And when I was about 16 years old, had just finished high school there, it was time, my parents were missionaries. They were due to come home to the U.S. And at that time, there was a war for independence there. From the local people trying to gain independence from the colonial white regime that was there. And at that point, they were not sending any missionaries back at that time. I stayed here, went to college, graduated, got married, was working. Don't have time to tell you the whole story. You can have my wife in here to tell her side of it sometime. But we felt God calling us to go back. And so in 1988, my wife and I went as missionaries, and we served for 12 years there.
Back to Zimbabwe?
Back to Zimbabwe. And in 2000, I didn't want to come back, but God clearly said, I'm done with you here. Move on. And when I came back through another series of events, I found out about this opening. The director of the Tide Ministry was retiring at that time, and I applied, and here I am. Part of a missions organization, so God got me back into ministry in an organization where I can still have an impact around the globe and have the opportunity to travel to some of these countries, because we do take teams to help train and encourage the indigenous leaders that we have the partnerships with.
When it comes to missionary trips, I think a lot of people may have just heard the terminology, but they may not quite be as familiar with the ongoings of that. Could you take us through what that was like for you? How long were you over on the missions trip?
12 years.
12 years.
Yeah, just take us through like what that's like. What we over here may not, when we hear it, really. That's I think that's interesting. That's that I find interesting, and I think a lot of people would be interested in that as well.
Yeah. Well, when we were first sensing God calling us, we contacted the missions organization that my parents had been with, and said, we're interested, we're sensing God calling us. And they said, well, what do you think you'd like to do? And I said, I know the mission has farm operations. I think I'd like to go help out and work on the farms and help run those farms. And they said, well, we don't really need that right now. We need teachers. And I didn't graduate with a teaching certification, but they were so desperate for teachers, they let anybody with a bachelor's degree come and teach. So I went and I taught high school science for 5 years.
Wow.
And then the church over there asked me to move to a Bible school. And so I taught at a Bible school then for the next 7 years.
So when you're there, where do you stay?
We stayed in housing. It was similar to housing here. I mean, it was like a normal house with indoor plumbing. And it was on a mission, what some people would call a compound or a mission station. And on there was a boarding school facility. So the students came, many of them actually came from the cities. You'd have thought that maybe they'd have come from other rural areas, but they came from the cities out to board. The missions had a reputation for giving good education. And so that's where we lived. And
of all the places that you've been to, as someone who is also an avid traveler, which one resonates with you the most?
I can't say any resonate the most. I just love to travel. I love to meet new people and to experience new cultures.
Is there one that sticks out that you just think, I felt so impacted by this particular group of people or this area or this culture?
I think Pakistan really, I felt that way because I went there feeling, I honestly was very apprehensive because Pakistan is an Islamic republic. And so I was going as a believer, and I was going with another minister. We were going to participate in a conference. And when we got there at immigration and I was going up to the desk, I was in my mind praying, God, just give us favor. And a guy came and he pointed us to, and he said, you two get over in this line. And a new guy came out and sat at that desk. And he just smiled at us and welcomed us. And it just changed my whole,
set the tone for the whole
right
trip.
away I was at ease. And then the way the people interacted with us and, had the opportunity to go out into their homes and to experience not just as a tourist, but real life for what it is like for a Pakistani person to live there.
And when, roundabout when was that?
That was in 2018 when I was there.
So how can, Don, here's a question. How can the community support you and the Tide?
Glad you asked that. Obviously, people think, first thing we want money because it does take finances for all these things. But there's a whole, not a raft of ways, but several ways that the community can get engaged. One that we're looking at right now, we're ramping up for. We started a couple years ago doing an annual shoe drive. We call it Your Souls, Their Souls. And we ask people to clean out your closets, and we work with a partner organization that we collect the shoes. They actually pay us for the shoes by weight. And then they take those shoes and they help indigenous groups in third world countries. They will take somebody and give them some business training, and then they give them shoes as inventory to set up their own little shoe store.
Interesting.
And then what they pay us for the shoes, we're taking and we're using that in India right now to do literacy training. Because our focus is primarily on the rural areas where there's a lot of poverty. The education system is not well developed. I mean, India is a tech country, but that's like in the urban areas. Out in the villages, there are people who just don't have the education. And so we have set up training centers to teach them to read and write. So we have adult literacy training centers, we have children literacy training centers. And the funding for those, what we take in from the shoe drive, we're using to fund the literacy training in India.
And so is this the shoe drive currently going on?
We do, officially, it's going on from January through March next year.
Okay.
But people know that now that we've done it a couple years, people know this, and right now we have sitting outside our office, we have a big storage container because Cube Storage said, hey, where are you putting all these shoes? We don't really have somewhere, so they had an extra cube they set outside our office.
And where's your office? I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay, it's just outside of Green Village. It's on Route 997 or Cumberland Highway. We have office space in the Lehman Construction building there. So if you know where Lehman Construction is, you'll see our sign as you're driving by there.
And so even though the shoe drive isn't technically going on, if somebody was cleaning out their closet now as we're getting into the winter months, they could still bring them by and drop them off.
Right. And we will, when the actual shoe drive is going on, we have numerous businesses and individuals who will be collection points for us. So those will be on our website at thetide.org.
And then when you take the shoes over to different places, are you ever in need of somebody to go with you and your organization to these places?
We don't take the shoes directly. Okay. We collect the shoes, and there's the partner organization. They're the ones that distribute them. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Katie's just basically saying if you want her to take them, she's willing. She'll go. She'll just don't have to bother that other company, that other organization. Yeah. Katie's willing to just take them over for you.
A couple of years ago, Don, I got certified. I got my TEFL certification and teaching English as a foreign language, and it's always been kind of my drive to get somewhere remote and teach. It's just something I've always wanted to do. Haven't quite had the opportunity to do it yet. So as you're talking, I'm just thinking, how can I go with you to some of these places and assist?
When we do take these teams, we call them leader-to-leader teams, but that's a bit of a misnomer because oftentimes the teams, we might have one pastor on the team, but a lot of what we would call lay people, just regular people like you, and helping just to go and to encourage and to teach and to interact with people.
Yeah, she's like she said, she's one of a goal has been to teach remote, somewhere remotely, and my goal has been to get her somewhere remote. So I think we could work together and really serve a bunch of masters here. Why not?
Well, we're ramping up. COVID kind of closed us down a little bit on our overseas trips, but we're getting back up there and scheduling for the future.
Is there anything physically going on at your offices that people would be able to come and participate in other than dropping off shoes? Would there be I don't know how else to say it, but would there be a reason to show up at your office for anything, to be there?
We do have volunteer opportunities. One of the things, obviously, we do mailings. So we have volunteers that come in and they help stuff and address and seal those, get those going. During the shoe drive, we have people come in and they help sort the shoes, package the shoes, and get them ready to go. So there are at times opportunities. We have golf outings where their volunteers would come and help at the actual golf course. We started doing about 3 years ago a race to share the gospel, so people can get engaged in that. We started first virtual, but now this year in the spring was the first time we did an in-person and virtual. So that's coming up in May next year. We'll have another race to share the gospel. So there's ways for people to engage beyond getting out the checkbook and writing a check.
Sure.
But you would still take.
Definitely, if anybody has that checkbook ready to go.
It's because I don't want it to sound, Don, I don't want to sound like you're discouraging anybody
Oh
from
no, we
whipping up a checkbook
are
and
not.
stroking a check.
We are not. Yeah.
Don, with the last minute that we have left, if this was piquing someone's interest, how do they find you, get more information?
Yeah, if they go to the tide.org, there on our website, it shares basically everything I've been sharing about. You can get more information about that. And as I mentioned, we love visitors to stop in just to talk with us and to visit and see who we are and ask questions. Or call us at, if you're in this area, 717-264-7288.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Don. This
Thanks,
was very interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks for sharing a little bit about your travels, too. Really interesting.
If you'd like to be featured on an upcoming episode of Let's Talk Tri-State, call 717-597-9200 or email letstalk@921thegoat.com.